After discovering the pregnancy, the millionaire proposed a contract to raise the baby, but she wanted to keep her independence. The office on the top floor of Hamilton Industries in Seattle seemed smaller that morning. Ryan Hamilton, at 42, stared at the woman sitting in front of him as if she had just announced the end of the world. In a way, for him, that was exactly what Valerie Cooper, his 28-year-old housekeeper, had done. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant," she repeated, her intertwined hands resting on her lap, maintaining a surprisingly serene posture for someone who had just dropped a bombshell of that caliber. Ryan ran his hand through the gray hair at his temples, a nervous habit he had developed over the years managing corporate crises. But no hostile takeover or drop in shares could have prepared him for this moment. "And you're absolutely sure of that?" he began, but Valerie interrupted him with a firm nod. "Yes, Ryan. He's your son." Her green eyes met his with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. That night after the company charity event, there was no one else. The memory of that night 3 months ago came back like a flash. The champagne, the celebration at the closing of a billion-dollar contract, the solitude shared in their penthouse when everyone left. Valerie had stayed to help with the organization, as she always did. One conversation led to another, and years of unresolved tension culminated in a moment of passion that they both pretended hadn't happened the next morning. Ryan stood up, walking over to the window that offered a panoramic view of Elia Bay Harbor. The boats looked tiny down there, just as their usual problems now seemed insignificant in the face of this new reality. "We can work this out," he said, turning to her. "I'll draw up a contract, full financial support, of course, an account for the child, the best schools, premium health insurance." No, Valerie's answer was soft, but firm as steel. Ryan blinked, disconcerted. In 15 years of building a corporate empire, he had rarely heard that word. "What do you mean, no? I don't want a contract, Ryan. I didn't come here to negotiate or make demands." Valerie stood up, smoothing out the simple dress she was wearing. "I only came to inform you because I believe you have a right to know, but I'm going to raise this baby alone." "That's ridiculous," Ryan protested, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used at board meetings. "I'm the father. I have responsibilities, rights." "And no one is denying that," Valerie replied, remaining calm. "You can participate in the child's life as much as you like, but I don't need your money or elaborate contracts. I have my own life, my own independence." Ryan watched the woman in front of him as if seeing her for the first time. During the 3 years that Valerie had worked in his home, he had always seen her as efficient and discreet, taking care of everything with a quiet competence that allowed him to focus on his work. Now he realized that he had never really known her. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I can give you and the baby a life you could never have on your own." A sad smile crossed Valerie's lips. "Because some things can't be solved with money or contracts, Ryan. This baby, it's not a corporate project or an acquisition. It's a life." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken implications. Out the window, dark clouds were beginning to form over the bay, typical of fall in Seattle. "What about your job?" Ryan finally asked, trying to find some control over the situation. "I'm resigning, effective immediately," Valerie replied, picking up her purse. "I've left a formal letter with your secretary. My replacement has already been trained for 2 weeks." The realization hit Ryan like a punch. She had planned all this methodically, without him noticing. While he spent his days in meetings and business calls, Valerie was quietly preparing her exit. "You can't just leave like that," he said, his voice betraying a vulnerability that surprised him. "I can and I will," Valerie replied softly. "But I'm not disappearing, Ryan. You could be a part of this child's life if you want to. You just need to understand that it will be on my terms, not through contracts or financial control." She walked to the door, pausing for a moment with her hand on the knob. "I have a doctor's appointment next week. If you want to go, let me know. You have my number." Ryan stood still, watching the door close behind her. The office, normally his haven of power and control, now seemed strangely empty. For the first time in years, he felt completely lost. His phone rang, probably some corporate emergency waiting for his attention. But Ryan remained motionless, staring at the chair where Valerie had been sitting moments before. In his mind, He was beginning to realize that all the skills that had taken him to the top of the business world, negotiation, control, financial power, were useless in the face of the most important challenge he had ever faced. In the streets below, Valerie emerged from the corporate building, taking a deep breath of the humid Seattle air. A hand unconsciously rested on her still flat belly as she walked towards her small apartment in Ballard. She knew the battle was just beginning, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly in control of her destiny. Ryan spent the next few days immersed in a mechanical routine that barely disguised his inner turmoil. During a video conference with international investors, he found himself staring at the empty space where the cup of coffee Valerie always left on his desk. At precisely 9 in the morning, "Mr. Hamilton?" The voice of his new executive assistant, Marion, brought him back to reality. "The board is waiting for your decision on the merger with Tech Solutions." "Cancel the meeting," he replied, abruptly disconnecting the call. The surprised faces of the executives disappeared from the screen, leaving him alone with his thoughts. In her apartment, Valerie was facing her own challenges. Sitting at the kitchen table in her modest apartment in Ballard, she examined cost spreadsheets and job possibilities. Her savings could support her for a few months, but she needed a concrete plan before the baby was born. The phone vibrated. It was her sister, Charlotte, calling from Portland. "Val, did you really turn down his financial help?" Charlotte sounded incredulous. "This is Ryan Hamilton we're talking about. The man is worth billions. I don't want my son to grow up as a corporate project," Valerie replied, running her hand over the small bulge in her belly. "I've seen how Ryan deals with everything in his life, through contracts, clauses, and conditions. But he has rights as a father," Charlotte argued. "And I'm not denying that. I just want him to understand that being a father goes far beyond providing financial resources." Meanwhile, in Ryan's penthouse in downtown Seattle, he was having a similar conversation with his best friend and corporate lawyer, Marcus Chen. "You can file for shared custody," Marcus suggested, pouring himself a whiskey. "Establish your rights legally." Ryan watched the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "And start my son's life with a court battle? That's not how I want to do it." "Then how do you intend to do it?" Marcus asked, studying his friend's troubled expression. "Honestly, I don't know," Ryan admitted, something rare for a man used to having all the answers. "For the first time, I'm completely lost." The next morning, Ryan surprised everyone by canceling his meetings and driving to Ballard. The neighborhood, with its restored Victorian houses and small cafes, was a completely different world from the corporate environment he was used to. He ran into Valerie, leaving a job interview at a local publishing house. She stopped at the sight of him, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "How did you?" she began. "I still have your file," he admitted. "Listen, can we talk? No contracts, no lawyers. Just talk." Valerie hesitated for a moment before nodding. "There's a cafe nearby." Cafe Anchor was a small, cozy establishment, very different from the refined restaurants Ryan frequented. They sat at a table at the back, where the sunlight streamed in through an old window. "I've spent the last few days thinking," Ryan began, rotating his coffee cup between his hands, "about how I've built my entire life on control and power. Every relationship, every interaction, all mediated by contracts and clear expectations. And it worked well for business," Valerie commented. "Yes, but this isn't business, is it?" He met her eyes. "It's our son." The word "our" hung between them, loaded with meaning. "I want to be part of his life, or hers," Ryan continued. "Not just as a financial provider, but really part of this child's life. And yours too, if you let me." Valerie studied his face, looking for signs of the calculating businessman she knew. Instead, she found something new: vulnerability, perhaps even fear. "How do you imagine this would work?" she asked softly. "Honestly, I have no idea. I've never done it before." Ryan smiled slightly. "But I'm willing to learn. No contracts, no trying to control everything. Just being there." "It's going to be hard for you," Valerie observed. "Giving up control isn't exactly your strong suit." "It's not," he agreed, "but some things are worth the effort of changing." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. Less tense, more contemplative. Outside, Ballard's life went on. People passing by with their dogs, artists carrying equipment to their studios, baristas preparing coffee. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, Valerie finally said. At 2 in the afternoon at the Harborview Clinic. Ryan nodded, understanding the implied invitation. I'll be there. When they said goodbye on the sidewalk in front of the cafe, something had changed. It wasn't a complete resolution, but a first step towards something new and unknown for both of them. Back in his office, Ryan found a pile of documents waiting for his signature. Contracts, mergers, acquisitions, the kind of thing that used to dominate his thoughts. Now it all seemed strangely distant. He picked up his phone and, for the first time in years, began to reorganize his schedule not around business meetings, but around something much more important. The start of a new life, not just for his son, but for himself. In her apartment, Valerie was also making adjustments to her plans. While organizing her notes from the job interview, she realized that perhaps there was a middle ground between total independence and accepting help. The challenge would be to find that balance without compromising her principles or Ryan's chance to really grow as a person and as a father. The sun was beginning to set over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new challenges and possibilities. For both of them, it was the beginning of a journey that no contract could predict or control. The ultrasound room at the Harborview Clinic was plunged into expectant silence. Ryan, sitting in an uncomfortable chair next to the gurney where Valerie lay, watched as the technician adjusted the equipment. His $3,000 Italian suit seemed strangely out of place in that clinical environment. It might be a bit chilly, the technician warned, applying the gel to Valerie's stomach. Ryan noticed how she instinctively held her breath, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the gurney. Without thinking, he held out his hand. Valerie hesitated for a moment before accepting it, her fingers entwining in his. It was the first time they had touched since that night 3 months ago. The monitor came alive with black and white images, indistinguishable to the untrained eye. And then, filling the silence of the room, came the sound. Fast, strong, determined. That's the baby's heart, the technician smiled. 150 beats per minute, perfectly normal. Ryan felt something break inside him. It was no longer an abstract idea, a problem to be solved or a contract to be negotiated. It was real. It was life. Do you see this shape here? The technician pointed at the screen. That's the head. And here, it looks like we have a little wiggler. Look at those movements. Valerie let out a soft laugh, silent tears streaming down her face. Ryan realized that she was crying too, something she hadn't done since her mother's death 15 years ago. After the appointment, they walked together to the parking lot. The Seattle sky was surprisingly clear for a fall afternoon. Do you want some lunch? Ryan asked, his hands in his pockets to resist the urge to touch her again. I have another interview in an hour, Valerie replied, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. About that, Ryan began, but she interrupted him with a firm look. No, Ryan, we've already talked about this. Just listen to me, please. He took a deep breath. I'm not offering money or trying to control the situation, but I know people in publishing. I can make a few calls just to open doors. What you do with these opportunities is entirely up to you. Valerie studied his face for a moment. Why are you doing this? Because, Ryan hesitated, searching for the right words. Because that sound in there changed everything. I don't just want to be a weekend dad or a distant provider. I want to be part of it, for real. And if that means learning to help without controlling, then that's what I'm going to do. A group of medical residents walked past them, animatedly discussing clinical cases. Valerie watched them for a moment before turning her attention to Ryan. All right, she finally agreed. You can make the calls, but on one condition. What? Have dinner with me tonight. At my place? We need to talk about a lot of things, and I prefer to do it in an environment where I feel comfortable. Ryan nodded, surprised by the invitation. What time? 7 o'clock. And Ryan. She smiled slightly. Leave your suit at home. That evening, wearing jeans and a casual shirt for the first time Valerie could remember, Ryan knocked on the door of the small apartment in Ballard. The smell of something cooking escaped through the cracks. The apartment was modest but cozy, with shelves full of books and a few plants decorating the corners. In the American kitchen, Valerie was finishing preparing what looked like lasagna. I didn't know you cooked, Ryan commented. placing the bottle of non-alcoholic wine he had brought on the counter. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me," she replied, without hostility. "That's part of the problem, isn't it?" Over dinner, sitting at the small kitchen table, they began to really talk. Not about contracts or arrangements, but about their lives, their fears, their hopes for the future. "My father abandoned us when I was 6, Valerie revealed, playing with the food on her plate. "That's why independence is so important to me. I learned from an early age not to depend on anyone." "My father was always there," Ryan replied. "Physically at least, but it was all about expectations, results, success, and business. I guess that's why I try to control everything. It's the only model I know." The evening progressed with mutual revelations and discoveries. Ryan learned that Valerie dreamed of being a writer as well as an editor. Valerie discovered that under the facade of the ruthless CEO, there was a man who kept all the letters her mother had written to her before she died. By the time the conversation reached the baby, something had changed between them. It was no longer a negotiation, but a joint exploration of possibilities. "I don't want our child to grow up in the midst of a Cold War between us," Valerie said softly. "But I can't give up who I am either." "What if," Ryan paused, choosing his words carefully, "what if we found a way together? Not as a couple, necessarily, but as partners in this? No contracts, no demands. Just two people trying to do the best for this child." The silence that followed was filled with the soft sound of the rain that had begun to fall outside. Through the kitchen window, the lights of Seattle twinkled in the night, like fallen stars. "I'd like that," Valerie finally replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "But it's going to take a lot of work. From both of us." "I'm willing to try," Ryan said, surprising himself with his own sincerity. When he said goodbye that night, standing in the doorway of the apartment, something fundamental had changed. It wasn't a happy ending. It was just the beginning of a complex journey. But for the first time, they both felt they were heading in the same direction. The Hamilton Industries boardroom was packed that morning, but Ryan could barely concentrate on the presentations. His phone vibrated discreetly. It was a message from Valerie with a photo of the latest ultrasound. Under the table, his fingers glided over the image, a small smile escaping the corner of his lips. "Mr. Hamilton?" Marcus Chun, her lawyer, called out. "We need your decision on the merger with Tech Solutions." Ryan put the phone away, straightening up in his chair. "The merger is off," he announced, to general astonishment. "Redirect the resources to expand our technology division internally." As the executives exchanged puzzled glances, Ryan continued, "I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on legacies. I don't just want to be known as the CEO who made aggressive acquisitions. I want to build something meaningful." Across town, Valerie was taking part in an interview at Cascade Publishing, one of the largest publishing houses in the northwest of the United States. The editorial director, a middle-aged woman called Patricia Whitman, looked at her CV with interest. "Your references are impressive," Patricia commented, "and Ryan Hamilton personally called to recommend you. But I want to know, why editorial?" Valerie adjusted herself in the chair, one hand unconsciously resting on her slightly protruding belly. "I've always believed in the power of stories to transform lives. I've spent the last few years organizing the lives of others, but now I want to help give a voice to new authors." Patricia smiled, closing the folder. "When can you start?" The news of the new job deserved a celebration. That evening, in a small Thai restaurant on Capitol Hill, Valerie and Ryan shared a meal in a more relaxed atmosphere than their last interactions. "Here's to your new career." Ryan raised his glass of iced tea, while Valerie toasted with pomegranate juice. "You really didn't have to make that call," she commented, but her tone was more one of gratitude than reprimand. "I just opened a door," Ryan replied. "You earned the position on your own merits." He hesitated before continuing. "Actually, you made me realize a few things about my own company." "What do you mean?" "I always thought that success meant constant expansion, acquisitions, growing numbers. But being present at the last doctor's appointments, watching our son grow up, it made me question what really matters." The waiter brought the main courses, and the aroma of fresh herbs and curry filled the air between them. Ryan continued, "I decided to restructure Hamilton Industries. Less hostile mergers, more internal development. I want to create something our son can be proud of one day. Valerie studied him for a moment. You're really changing, aren't you? I'm trying, he admitted. It's not easy. Yesterday, I found myself wanting to buy the entire stock of a baby store. This drew a laugh from Valerie. Please tell me you didn't do that. No, but it was close. Ryan smiled, then turned serious. Actually, I want to talk to you about something. I'm thinking of reducing my workload at the company, delegating more, working from home a few times a week. Why? Because I want to be there, not just in the big moments, but in everyday life. If you allow it, of course. Valerie placed her hashies on her plate, thoughtful. It would be nice to have help, especially after the baby is born. But Ryan, I need you to understand. That doesn't mean we're going to— I know, he interrupted her gently. I'm not trying to force anything. I just want to be a good father. The rest of dinner passed in lighter conversation, discussing names for the baby and sharing childhood stories. When they left the restaurant, the Seattle night was surprisingly starry. Want a ride? Ryan offered. Actually, I'm meeting Charlotte at Pike Place Market. She came all the way from Portland to help me get started on the baby's room. I can help too, he offered quickly. I'm good with tools. Well, theoretically, I've always had people do it for me, but I'm willing to learn. Valerie smiled, imagining Ryan Hamilton, billionaire CEO, trying to assemble a crib. How about Sunday? Charlotte's coming back on Saturday night. Sunday is perfect. They said goodbye with a hesitant hug, the first since this whole journey had begun. On the way to meet her sister, Valerie reflected on how life could change in a matter of months. Ryan, for his part, drove to his penthouse thinking about how he had never imagined that his greatest acquisition would actually be a lesson in letting go. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt like they were building something real. Not a corporate empire or a perfectly controlled life, but a family with all its imperfections and possibilities. The sound of hammering echoed through Valerie's apartment on a rainy Seattle Sunday. Ryan, wearing jeans and a casual paint-stained t-shirt, stared at the instructions on the crib as if they were a particularly complex corporate merger contract. Are you sure you don't want professional help? Valerie asked, watching him from the bedroom door, holding a cup of ginger tea. No, I can do it, he insisted, although the pile of parts scattered on the floor suggested otherwise. It's just a crib. It can't be more complicated than running a multinational. 2 hours and several muttered swear words later, the crib was finally taking shape. Ryan stood back to admire his work, an expression of genuine pride on his face that Valerie rarely saw in her professional interactions. I think it's crooked, she commented, trying to hide a smile. It's artistically asymmetrical, he corrected, making her laugh. The sound of her laughter filled the room, and for a moment, the familiarity of the moment almost made them forget the complexity of their situation. Ryan's cell phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Marcus Chun, his corporate lawyer. The board is questioning your latest decisions, Marcus informed him. Mainly the cancellation of the merger with Tech Solutions. They want an emergency meeting tomorrow. Ryan looked at Valerie, who had started organizing small baby clothes in a newly assembled dresser. Tell them I can't come until after 3. I have an important appointment in the morning. Ryan, it's the whole council, and I have an antenatal appointment, he interrupted firmly. Priorities have changed, Marcus. After hanging up, Ryan noticed Valerie watching him. What is it? Nothing, she replied, folding a pair of tiny overalls. I never thought I'd see Ryan Hamilton, the Seattle Shark, prioritizing a doctor's appointment over a board meeting. People change, he said simply, turning his attention to a shelf that still needed to be installed. The next morning, during the consultation, Dr. Angela Martinez smiled when she saw the results of the tests. Everything is progressing perfectly. Do you want to know the sex of the baby? Ryan and Valerie exchanged glances. Over the last few weeks, they had developed a silent communication that surprised them both. Yes, they replied in unison. It's a girl, the doctor announced. Ryan felt his hands tremble slightly. A daughter? He, who had spent his entire life in a world dominated by men, building empires and closing deals, would have a daughter. On the way to the parking lot, Valerie noticed a silence. Are you disappointed? What? No, he answered quickly. Just scared. I don't know anything about raising girls. Well, I am one, Valerie smiled. I can give you some tips. They stopped at a nearby cafe, a new routine they had developed after their appointments. Ryan absent-mindedly stirred his coffee, while Valerie savored a fruit smoothie. I need to tell you something, she said after a moment. Cascade Publishing wants me to lead a new project. It's a great opportunity, but it involves a few short trips to New York over the next few months. Nothing too long, but I can help, Ryan offered immediately. I can rearrange my schedule when you need to travel. I have an office in New York too, so I can schedule meetings to coincide with your trips. Valerie studied him for a moment. You're really serious about this, aren't you? Our daughter deserves it, he replied, the word carrying a weight they both felt. Back in the office, Ryan faced the board with a new perspective. The concerned expressions of the older executives no longer intimidated him as before. Gentlemen, he began, I understand your concerns. But Hamilton Industries will not be defined only by aggressive acquisitions. We are redirecting our focus to sustainable innovation and internal development. Is this about that housekeeper? One of the directors asked abruptly. We've heard rumors. This, Ryan interrupted, his voice sharp as steel, is about building a legacy that goes beyond numbers on a spreadsheet. If anyone here has a problem with my decisions, my door is always open for constructive discussions. Otherwise, I suggest we focus on the future of the company. That evening, alone in his penthouse, Ryan found himself fiddling with his laptop, not with financial spreadsheets, but researching child development and parenting. His phone vibrated with a message from Valerie, a photo of the crib he had assembled, now decorated with little mobiles of stars and moons. It's still crooked, the message said, but I think it has personality. Ryan smiled, realizing that for the first time in his adult life, he was building something that couldn't be measured in dollars or shares. It was scary and exciting at the same time, like diving into uncharted waters without a map or compass. But as he replied to the message with a hammer emoji, something the old Ryan Hamilton would never do, he realized that some transformations, even the quietest ones, are the most profound. And sometimes, true success lies in learning to navigate without trying to control the tide. The metallic sound of the elevator announced Ryan's arrival on the 42nd floor of Hamilton Industries. His footsteps echoed down the empty corridor. It was only 6:30 in the morning, the time he usually started his day, long before his employees arrived. But today was different. In her hands, she held a small cardboard box that her mother had kept for decades. The night before, while looking for some old documents in her personal safe, she had found the box containing her childhood memories. Among yellowed photos and school cards, there was a small, worn teddy bear, his first gift from his father, before business became his only priority. Sitting in his executive chair, Ryan twirled the teddy between his fingers, remembering the last conversation he had with his father before his death 5 years ago. You did it, son, his father had said from his hospital bed. You've turned Hamilton Industries into something greater than I ever dreamed of. Now those words had a different flavor. What did bigger mean? Bigger in profits? In acquisitions? Or was there something more important that his father had never been able to express? His phone vibrated. It was a message from Valerie with a photo of the baby's room in progress. The once white walls now displayed a delicate mural of constellations that she was painting. I need your opinion on something, she wrote. Free for coffee in 30 minutes? Ryan smiled, putting the teddy bear away in his desk drawer. Sure, Pike Place. Seattle's historic market was just starting to wake up when they met. Vendors were arranging their stalls of fresh produce, and the aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air. So, what's the big question? Ryan asked, as they sat at a table overlooking the bay. Valerie took some fabric samples out of her bag. Curtains for the bedroom. I know it sounds silly, but I can't decide. It's not silly, he replied, studying the patterns with the same intensity he usually devoted to million-dollar contracts. I like this deep blue. It matches the constellations you're painting. That's exactly what I thought, Valerie smiled, then hesitated. There's something else? I've been invited to a publishing conference in Chicago next month. It's for 3 days. Ryan sensed her apprehension. You should go. It's a great opportunity. But what about the appointments? We have the morphological ultrasound scheduled. We can reschedule. Or, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I can go to Chicago too. We have a branch there that really needs supervision. Valerie studied him for a moment. You don't have to reorganize your whole life because of me, Ryan. I'm not, he replied sincerely. I'm reorganizing for a daughter. And, honestly, it's been good for me too. Yesterday, I found some old things. He told her about the memory box and the teddy bear, about his father and the last words they had exchanged. Valerie listened attentively, noticing the layers of emotion behind his usual controlled facade. You know, she said softly, maybe your daughter could have a different experience. A father who was present not only physically, but emotionally too. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. That's what I want most. But sometimes I wonder if I know how to do it. No one is born knowing, Valerie smiled. We're learning together. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Ryan had a video conference with Asian investors, and Valerie needed to finalize some manuscripts for the publisher. But before they parted, she hesitated. That teddy bear, do you still have it? It's in my drawer. Why? Maybe, she bit her lip thoughtfully. Maybe your daughter would like to have it one day. The suggestion took Ryan by surprise. The idea of passing on something so personal, something that carried so many complex memories, had never occurred to him. But now, it seemed perfectly right. Back at the office, Ryan found Marcus Chun waiting with more concern from the board. But for the first time, the corporate pressures seemed distant, less urgent. Schedule a general meeting for next week, he instructed his lawyer. I'm going to present a new vision for the company, something that goes beyond numbers. Are you sure about that? Marcus asked, concerned. The market is volatile. The market is always volatile, Ryan replied, his hand unconsciously touching the drawer where he had kept the teddy bear. But some things are more important than stock market fluctuations. That evening, alone in his penthouse, Ryan finally opened an email he had been avoiding for days. It was from his old therapist, Dr. Morrison, who had helped him deal with his father's death. Maybe it's time to resume our sessions, he typed, feeling a weight leave his shoulders. There's a lot I need to process. In her apartment in Ballard, Valerie was adding the last details to the constellation mural, humming softly. Her hand rested on her growing belly, feeling her daughter's gentle movements. On her desk, next to the manuscript she needed to revise, was a small notebook where she had started writing letters to the baby, telling of her hopes, fears, and above all, how her father was turning into someone she barely recognized in a surprisingly good way. The Seattle night shone through the window, the city lights reflecting on the waters of the bay like the stars she had painted on the wall. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, both Ryan and Valerie felt they were building something truly valuable. Not just a crib or a baby's room, but a new kind of family, defined not by contracts or expectations, but by conscious choices and mutual growth. The Cascade Publishing conference room was buzzing with the energy of an important editorial meeting, but Valerie could hardly concentrate. Her hand instinctively rested on her 6-month-old belly as her mind wandered to the call she had received earlier from Charlotte. Our father is ill, her sister had said, her voice trembling. Terminal cancer. He wants to see you. Now, sitting among editors discussing deadlines and marketing strategies, Valerie felt the weight of that news pressing down on her chest. The same man who had abandoned them 2 decades ago wanted a meeting on his deathbed. Valerie, Patricia Whitman brought her back to the present. Your thoughts on the new editorial line? Sorry, she muttered, gathering her thoughts. Her phone vibrated. It was Ryan. Emergency. Can you meet me in 15 minutes? Valerie had never used the pregnant card to get out of appointments, but today she made an exception. Minutes later, she was in the cafe on the first floor of the building, where Ryan was waiting for her with a worried expression. Charlotte called me, he said as soon as she sat down. I thought you might need to talk. The surprise must have been evident on his face because he continued. Your sister and I have been in touch. She worries about you. So, you know about my father? Ryan nodded, studying his face. What do you want to do? Honestly? I don't know. Valerie stirred the glass of tea he had already ordered for her. Ginger with honey, her current preference. How can I forgive someone who abandoned us without looking back? Maybe it's not about forgiveness, Ryan suggested softly. Maybe it's about closure. For you and for our daughter. Our daughter? Valerie repeated thoughtfully. That's why it hurts so much. I can't imagine how anyone could abandon a child. And now, with her voice faltered, Ryan reached across the table, touching her fingers lightly. Over the last few months, these small gestures of comfort had become more natural between them. I'll go with you, he offered. If you like, to Portland, wherever you need to go. The silence that followed was filled with the buzz of coffee and the distant sound of Seattle traffic. Valerie observed their joined hands on the table, hands that had barely touched a few months ago, now offering mutual support. I'm afraid, she finally admitted, afraid that seeing him will make me relive everything. The day he left, the nights when Mom cried, thinking we couldn't hear her. You're not that 6-year-old girl anymore, Ryan reminded her gently. You're a strong woman who has built her life on her own terms. Nothing he says or does can change that. That night, after hours of reflection in her apartment, Valerie made her decision. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed a message to Ryan. Are we going to Portland this weekend? The reply came almost instantly. I've already booked the rooms at the Heathman Hotel. The drive to Portland on Saturday was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Ryan drove his Tesla with extra care, conscious of his precious passenger. Occasionally, Valerie would catch him looking at her, a mixture of concern and protection in his eyes. Charlotte was waiting for them in the lobby of Providence Portland Hospital. Her embrace of Valerie was long and tight, and her greeting to Ryan surprisingly familiar. Clearly, the conversations between them had been more frequent than Valerie had imagined. He's lucid today, Charlotte reported. The doctors say there's not much time left. Room 507 seemed smaller than it was, filled with the rhythmic sound of heart monitors. In bed, James Cooper looked like a frail version of the man Valerie remembered. His eyes, however, still had the same deep blue that she had inherited. Val, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You came. Ryan squeezed her hand lightly before moving away, giving them privacy. Valerie approached the bed, feeling the baby move, as if sensing her agitation. You're pregnant, James observed, his eyes watering. I'm so sorry. For everything. Why now? Valerie asked, her voice firmer than she expected. Why wait until you're dying to apologize? Because I'm a coward, he replied simply. I always have been. Running away was easier than facing up to my failures. But seeing you now, about to be a mother, I want you to know that it was my mistake, never yours. Silent tears streamed down Valerie's face. Through the glass door, she could see Ryan talking quietly to Charlotte in the hallway, both keeping a protective eye on her. Your daughter, James continued, she'll be lucky, because she'll have you for a mother. And that man out there, he looks different from what I was. He is, Valerie confirmed. He's learning, changing, trying. It's more than you did. The words were harsh, but there was no bitterness in them, just a statement of fact. James nodded slowly. You've become stronger than I've ever been, he said. I hope your daughter inherits that from you. When Valerie left the room an hour later, she felt strangely light. There was no miraculous forgiveness or dramatic reconciliation, just understanding and perhaps a little peace. Ryan wrapped his arms around her as soon as she closed the door, and for the first time, Valerie couldn't resist the comfort he offered. There, in the sterile corridor of a Portland hospital, something subtly changed between them. Are we going home? He asked softly. Yes, she replied, a hand on her belly. Let's go home. The journey back to Seattle was lighter than the journey out, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from Valerie's shoulders. Meeting her father in Portland had changed something subtle inside her. Not a miraculous healing of old wounds, but a deeper understanding of who she was and who she wanted to be. Ryan drove in silence, occasionally casting glances in her direction. During the trip, Valerie realized how he had become a constant presence in her life, no longer the distant CEO she had known years ago. I need to show you something, he said when they reached Seattle, diverting the car from its usual route. If you're willing. Curious, Valerie nodded. Ryan drove the Tesla through tree-lined streets until they reached Queen Anne, one of the city's most charming neighborhoods. They stopped in front of an impeccably restored Victorian house with a small garden in front. "What's that?" Valerie asked, although she suspected the answer. "I bought it 2 weeks ago," Ryan admitted, nervous in a way she rarely saw him. "Not to pressure you or anything, but my penthouse, it's no place for a child. And I thought it would be nice to have a more welcoming space for when our daughter comes to visit." Valerie felt her throat tighten with emotion. The gesture meant much more than a simple change of residence. It was Ryan recognizing and adapting to a new reality, making concrete changes in his life. "Would you like to see it?" he offered. The interior of the house was surprisingly cozy. Classic furniture was mixed with modern touches, and one of the rooms had already been partially transformed into a baby's room, with walls in a soft shade of aqua green. "Charlotte helped me with the colors," Ryan explained, almost shyly. "She said you like pastel colors." "You and my sister have been talking a lot," Valerie observed, touching a small nursing chair in the corner of the room. "She's been a great advisor," he admitted. "She's helped me understand a lot about you, about your story." Valerie turned to face him, feeling the baby move as if responding to the intensity of the moment. "Why are you doing all this, Ryan?" "Because," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because when I saw you with your father today, I understood something important. I don't just want to be a financial provider or a weekend dad. I want to be someone our daughter looks to when she needs support, someone she can trust." "Like today?" Valerie asked softly. "Like he did with me?" "Yes," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Just like today?" The moment was interrupted by the sound of Valerie's cell phone. It was Charlotte telling her that her father had taken a turn for the worse. The news should have shaken her more, but somehow, there in that house that represented so much about change and growth, she felt anchored. "Do you want me to take you to Portland again?" Ryan offered. "No," she replied, surprising herself. "I've already said my goodbyes. Now I need to focus on the future." In the days that followed, Valerie immersed herself in her work at the publishing house, finalizing preparations for the conference in Chicago. Ryan, meanwhile, continued his silent transformation. His employees noticed how he began to delegate more responsibilities, leaving the office at reasonable times and prioritizing meetings by video conference when possible. On a particularly sunny afternoon, something rare for Seattle at that time of year, they met for a routine checkup. In the waiting room, Ryan flipped nervously through a magazine about fatherhood. "Did you know that babies recognize their father's voice even before they're born?" he commented, clearly fascinated. "Is that why you've been talking to my belly every morning during our walks?" Valerie teased gently. Ryan blushed slightly. "Have you noticed that? It's hard not to notice when you stop in the middle of Pike Place Market to tell our daughter about the different types of fish on sale." The smile he gave in response was genuine and disarming. It was in these small moments that Valerie saw her transformation most clearly, not in grand gestures like buying a house, but in the small daily choices that showed her commitment to being present. The appointment went smoothly, with Dr. Martinez praising the baby's development. When they left the office, Ryan looked pensive. "What's wrong?" Valerie asked. "I was thinking, maybe we could have dinner together tonight. There are a few things I'd like to discuss about the arrangements after the baby is born." Valerie felt a moment of apprehension, but nodded. "My apartment? I can make that lasagna you liked." Hours later, sitting at Valerie's small kitchen table, the conversation flowed naturally between them. Ryan talked about his plans to take extended paternity leave, something unheard of for a CEO of his position. Valerie shared her ideas for balancing work at the publishing house with motherhood. "You know," she said, helping herself to more salad, "I never thought I'd say this, but you surprised me." Ryan Hamilton. "What do you mean?" "When I found out I was pregnant, I was sure you'd try to control everything with contracts and money. Instead," she made a vague gesture with her hand, encompassing everything that had changed between them. "Instead, you taught me that some things can't be controlled," he added. "And that maybe that's the best part." The sound of the rain starting outside created a bubble of intimacy around them. A moment suspended in time where past and future seemed to meet in perfect balance. The news of James Cooper's death arrived on a rainy Wednesday, typical of Seattle. Valerie received Charlotte's call while proofreading manuscripts at her desk at Cascade Publishing. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the rain pour down the window, feeling her daughter move as if she sensed her agitation. "Do you want to go to the funeral?" Ryan asked when she found him in the cafe on the first floor, his usual refuge for important conversations. "No," Valerie replied, surprising them both with her certainty. "Our last meeting was our real goodbye. The funeral would just be a formality." Ryan nodded in understanding. Over the last few months, he had learned to respect the way Valerie processed her emotions, direct and blunt, so different from his own tendency to analyze every angle of a situation. "Actually," she continued, stirring her chamomile tea, "I wanted to talk about something else. I've been thinking about your offer on the house in Queen, and—" Ryan's interest was immediate, although he tried to maintain a neutral expression. "Yes, maybe it would make sense for me to move closer. Not to live together," she added quickly, watching his face light up. "But there are some apartments available in the same neighborhood. It would be more practical when you want to see the baby." "I can help you look," he offered, trying to contain his enthusiasm. "I know some excellent realtors in the area." "Ryan," Valerie interrupted him gently, "it needs to be something I can afford on my own salary, without any financial interference from you." He took a deep breath, clearly fighting his instinct to want to solve everything with money. "Fine, but at least let me accompany you on your visits. As a consultant." Her smile was answer enough. Over the next few weeks, between medical appointments and preparations for the baby's arrival, they developed a routine of visiting apartments at weekends. Ryan bit his tongue every time he saw a place he considered unsuitable, reminding himself that it wasn't his decision to make. "What did you think of this one?" Valerie asked after they had visited a 2-bedroom apartment overlooking Kerry Park. "The floor needs replacing, the paint is peeling, and that electrical wiring is worrying," Ryan replied automatically, then saw her expression. "But it has potential, and the location is excellent for stroller walks. And it's within my budget," she added. "Besides, I've always wanted a renovation project." Ryan had to stop himself from offering to hire a complete renovation team. Instead, he asked, "Can I at least help with a few improvements? I promise to follow your lead." The idea of Ryan Hamilton, billionaire CEO, painting walls and changing sockets was both comical and touching. "All right," she agreed, "but no more hiring professionals. Let's do it ourselves." Though we didn't go unnoticed by either of them. The following weekend, equipped with brushes, paints, and basic tools, they began the transformation of the apartment. Ryan had swapped his usual Italian suit for jeans and an old t-shirt, looking strangely younger and more relaxed. "I never thought I'd see you like this," Valerie commented, watching him struggle with sandpaper. "There are lots of things I never thought I'd do," he replied, looking meaningfully at his 7-month belly. The work was slow but rewarding. Between coats of paint, they talked about their fears and hopes for the future. Ryan talked about his privileged but emotionally distant childhood and how he was determined to be a different father. Valerie shared stories of how her mother raised 2 daughters on her own, all the while maintaining dignity and strength. "She would be proud of you," Ryan said softly, watching Valerie critically examine a freshly painted wall. "For refusing your financial help and choosing an apartment that needs renovating. For being true to your principles. For teaching our daughter about independence and dignity before she was even born." The sound of their cell phones interrupted the moment. It was time for the childbirth preparation class they had agreed to take together. As they put away their painting materials, Valerie noticed how their lives had become intertwined in ways she had never imagined possible. "You know," she said as they closed up the apartment, "maybe we can work here again next weekend? We still have a lot to do." Ryan's smile lit up his tired, ink-stained face. "I can't wait." The sound of a baby crying echoed through the childbirth preparation classroom, part of an educational video that was being shown. Valerie felt her daughter move, as if responding to the sound, while Ryan, sitting next to her, made meticulous notes on his iPad. "You don't have to document every detail," she whispered, amused by his intense concentration. "I want to be prepared," he replied without taking his eyes off the screen. "I've already researched all the possible routes from your new apartment to the 3 best hospitals in Seattle, taking into account different schedules and traffic conditions." The instructor, a middle-aged woman called Grace, interrupted the video to demonstrate breathing techniques. Ryan immediately put away his iPad, his attention fully focused on the demonstration. Partners are key during labor, Grace explained. You will be the mother's emotional anchor throughout the process. Valerie watched as Ryan straightened up in his chair when he heard the word partners. Over the last few weeks, while they had been working together to renovate the apartment, their relationship had evolved into something they couldn't exactly define. More than friends, different from a couple, united by something deeper than a social contract. After class, walking down the corridor of the medical center, Ryan looked pensive. Valerie, he began hesitantly, I know we agreed to keep things separate, but I'd like to be present at the birth. She stopped walking, studying his face. Are you sure? It's not like a board meeting that you can delegate if you're uncomfortable. That's exactly why I want to be there, he replied with a sincerity that surprised her. Some things can't be delegated. In the elevator, going down to the parking garage, Valerie felt a wave of emotion hit her. Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones, or maybe it was the realization of how Ryan had changed over the last few months. All right, she agreed softly. In fact, I can't imagine doing this without you. His smile lit up his whole face, reminding her of the first time she saw him truly happy when they heard the baby's heartbeat for the first time. The following weekend, they continued working on the apartment. Ryan had insisted on at least hiring someone to do the electrics, arguing safety issues, and Valerie agreed after a long discussion about the limits between necessary help and independence. What do you think of this color for her room? Valerie asked, showing a swatch of a soft shade of lavender. Ryan considered it for a moment, then smiled. It matches the curtains you chose for my house. I thought of that, she admitted. I want her to feel at home in both places. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled only by the sound of brushes against the wall and the occasional movement of furniture. At some point, Ryan began to softly sing an old lullaby that his mother used to sing to him. I didn't know you sang, Valerie commented, surprised by the softness of his voice. There are many things you still don't know about me, he replied, a mischievous twinkle in his normally serious eyes. The moment was interrupted by Ryan's cell phone, an emergency at the company that required his immediate attention. Before, he would have rushed off to deal with the situation. Now, he calmly asked his vice president to deal with it. The company won't fall apart if I spend a Saturday painting my daughter's room, he explained when he saw Valerie's questioning look. As they took a break for lunch, sitting on the floor among cans of paint and old newspapers, Valerie noticed how Ryan seemed more relaxed, more human away from the corporate environment. I've been thinking, she began, playing with her salad, maybe we could establish some routines when she's born. Not contracts, she added quickly when she saw his expression, but arrangements, like family dinners on Wednesdays or Sunday mornings in the park. Ryan's face lit up at the suggestion. I'd like that very much, and maybe you could teach me how to cook a few basic things for when she's with me. Ryan Hamilton, wanting to learn how to cook. Valerie laughed. Now you're surprising me. Well, I can't just feed our daughter food from five-star restaurants, can I? The naturalness with which they discussed their future roles as parents, without contracts or lawyers, showed how much they had grown together over the last few months. Valerie's initial fear about Ryan trying to control everything had been replaced by a mutual respect in an unexpected partnership. As the sun began to set, casting golden shadows through the freshly cleaned windows, they both contemplated their work for the day. The baby's room was almost ready, with just a few final details missing. You know, Ryan said as they put away the materials, I never thought painting walls could be so satisfying. More satisfying than closing a $1 million contract? Valerie teased. Much more, he replied without hesitation, because this is real. It's for her. In that moment, watching Ryan wipe paint from his hands calloused by manual labor, Valerie understood that sometimes the biggest changes happen not through grand gestures or declarations, but in the small moments shared, in the daily choices that show who we really are. Valerie's cell phone alarm went off at 3 in the morning, but she was already awake. The contractions had started an hour ago, gentle but regular. Taking a deep breath as she had learned in class, she reached for the phone. Ryan, her voice was calm, controlled. It started. Within 15 minutes, he was at her door, still wearing sweatpants and a crumpled t-shirt, a sight so different from the always impeccable CEO that it almost made her laugh, despite her discomfort. "I took the alternative route we planned," he explained, helping her with her hospital bag. "Zero traffic at this hour." In the car, Valerie observed Ryan's tense profile as he drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted with a shaky smile, "but in a good way." The Swedish Medical Center hospital welcomed them with the quiet efficiency characteristic of the early morning. Dr. Martinez had already been notified and was on her way. In the assessment room, while a nurse checked Valerie's vital signs, Ryan methodically organized the items they had brought, consulting his digital list one last time. 3 minutes between contractions, the nurse informed him. "Let's get her to the delivery room." In the corridor, they met Charlotte, who had taken the first flight out of Portland as soon as she received the message. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She hugged her sister carefully. The next few hours dissolved into a sequence of intense moments. Valerie, who had always prized her control and independence, found herself leaning completely on Ryan. He didn't leave her side for a moment, offering her water, massaging her back, repeating the breathing techniques they had practiced. "You look amazing," he whispered during a particularly strong contraction. "Our daughter is lucky to have you as a mother." Silent tears streamed down Valerie's face, of pain, of emotion, of gratitude for not being alone at this moment. Charlotte, watching from her armchair in the corner, smiled as she saw how Ryan, the powerful CEO, had completely transformed in the last few hours. As the sun began to rise over Seattle, painting the room in golden hues, Dr. Martinez announced that it was time. Ryan took up his position next to Valerie, holding her hand tightly. "Remember when you said that some things can't be controlled?" he murmured. "I think I finally understand." The baby's cries filled the room at 7:43 in the morning. "It's a beautiful, healthy baby girl," Dr. Martinez announced, placing the small bundle on Valerie's chest. Ryan felt his legs go weak as he saw his daughter for the first time. All the contracts, mergers, and acquisitions in his life seemed insignificant compared to this moment. "Hi, Grace," Valerie whispered to the baby, tears flowing freely. They had chosen the name together weeks ago at one of the painting evenings in the apartment. Grace as the instructor who had helped them prepare for this moment. "Grace Hamilton Cooper," Ryan added softly, touching his daughter's tiny hand for the first time. Charlotte took a few discreet photos with her cell phone, capturing the moment the little family met. In the picture, Ryan had an expression that his shareholders would never recognize: vulnerable, emotional, completely surrendered to the moment. Hours later, when Grace was sleeping peacefully in her nursery and Charlotte had gone to get coffee, Ryan and Valerie finally had a moment alone. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For proving me wrong. For showing that people can change, that not everything needs to be controlled by contracts." Ryan smiled, exhausted but happy. "You taught me more than I could have imagined. About trust, about letting things flow naturally." A soft knock on the door announced Grace's return for another breastfeed. As the nurse brought the baby in, Ryan and Valerie exchanged a look of mutual understanding. They didn't need formal papers or agreements to know that their daughter would grow up surrounded by love, respect, and understanding. "Welcome to the world, little Grace," Ryan whispered, watching his daughter in Valerie's arms. "You've already changed everything." The first few days at home with Grace were a delicate dance of adjustment. Valerie watched her daughter sleeping in her newly assembled crib, the lavender walls silent witnesses to the profound changes in her life. The apartment in Queen Anne, which only a few months ago was just a renovation project, now pulsed with new life. Ryan showed up every morning before work, always bringing decaf coffee and fresh croissants from the neighborhood French bakery. His visits, initially thought to be brief, often stretched on as he lost himself in watching Grace's every little move. "She's got your eyes," he commented one of these mornings, holding his daughter with a delicacy that contrasted with his usually commanding posture. "That same deep blue, and her stubborn chin," Valerie replied, tucking a lock of unruly hair behind her ear as she prepared a bottle. The fatigue of the first days of motherhood was evident on her face, but there was a new serenity in her movements. "Can I stay with her this afternoon?" Ryan asked hesitantly. I know you have that video call with the editor, and I thought, are you sure? Do you have a board meeting? I cancelled it, he replied simply. Marcus can handle it. Besides, I've already watched all the baby care videos on YouTube. Valerie couldn't help but smile. The image of Ryan Hamilton, the dreaded CEO, watching tutorials on how to change diapers was both comical and touching. All right, she agreed, but call me if you need anything. The afternoon passed quietly. Valerie conducted her first post-maternity leave work meeting from the makeshift office in the guest room, occasionally hearing Ryan's soft voice in the room, apparently reading Goodnight Moon to Grace for the third time in a row. When he ended the call, he found father and daughter asleep on the sofa, Grace perfectly nestled on Ryan's chest, who was still holding the children's book. Quietly, he took out his phone and recorded the moment. Don't you dare show this to anyone, Ryan muttered, opening one eye. Too late. Charlotte's already asked for it to be framed. The soft sound of his laughter made Grace stir, but not wake up. You know, he said after a moment, I never really understood my father until now. Why he was so obsessed with building something to leave to me. And now I understand that I was doing it the wrong way. I built a corporate empire, but I almost missed the chance to build this. He gestured between them, indicating not just Grace, but the unconventional family they had become. Valerie sat in the nearby armchair, watching as the late afternoon light danced across her daughter's little face. You haven't lost anything, she said softly. In fact, I think you've gained something that no amount of money can buy. A family? Ryan suggested, his eyes meeting hers. A second chance? The moment was interrupted by Grace's soft cry, announcing that it was time for another feeding. With a naturalness that would surprise anyone who knew only the Ryan of 6 months ago, he carefully stood up and handed the baby to Valerie. I'll make us something to eat, he announced. I've been practicing the risotto recipe you taught me. Ryan Hamilton cooking? Now I can say I've seen it all. As he moved around the kitchen, Valerie nursed Grace in the bedroom armchair, softly humming the same lullaby she had heard Ryan sing so many times during the apartment renovation. The aroma of dinner began to fill the room, mingling with the soft scent of the baby and the distant sound of Seattle traffic. You know what's funny? She commented when Ryan returned with 2 glasses of lemon water. If someone had told me a year ago that we'd be here like this, I'd have laughed. What if they said I'd swap a board meeting for an afternoon reading children's stories? Exactly. Valerie settled Grace in her arms, watching her daughter fall asleep contentedly. But somehow it seems right, Ryan added. It feels right. 3 months had passed since Grace's birth, and the routine that Ryan and Valerie had established flowed with a naturalness that surprised them both. Mornings began with Ryan arriving with coffee and croissants. But now he also brought company documents to review while Grace slept on his lap. I need to show you something, Valerie said one of those mornings, as Ryan gently rocked Grace after a bottle. She opened her laptop, revealing a Word document. I started writing a book. Ryan leaned over to read the title on the screen. Contracts of the Heart, an unconventional love story. Is it about us? He asked, his voice mixed with surprise and curiosity. In a way, Valerie replied, settling Grace in her arms. It's about how sometimes life's most carefully laid plans are completely transformed by a single unexpected moment. Ryan smiled, remembering that morning in his office when Valerie announced her pregnancy. Like a pregnant housekeeper facing a controlling CEO? Exactly. Patricia, my boss at the publishing house, has already read the first few chapters. She thinks it has potential. The moment was interrupted by Ryan's phone. Marcus Churn, his lawyer and friend, with urgent news. A rival company was attempting a hostile takeover of Hamilton Industries. I have to go, Ryan said, reluctant to leave his familiar bubble. But first, he hesitated, then continued. I was thinking of having a special dinner this weekend. At my house, Charlotte is coming from Portland, and I thought we could celebrate Grace's 3 months. Valerie noticed something in his eyes, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that went beyond a simple family dinner. Sure, she replied. Shall I bring something? Just the 2 of you, he smiled, kissing Grace's forehead before leaving. In the days that followed, Valerie divided her time between looking after Grace, working on her book and watching the news about the possible hostile takeover of Hamilton Industries. Ryan showed up every morning as usual, but there was an underlying tension in his shoulders that she knew well from her days as a housekeeper. On the evening of dinner, Valerie arrived at the Victorian house in Queen, and with Grace sleeping peacefully in her baby carriage. The house was different, candles lit everywhere, soft music playing in the background, and a delicious aroma coming from the kitchen. "Did you really cook?" she asked, impressed to find Ryan finishing preparing what looked like grilled salmon. "I've been taking private lessons for the last few weeks," he admitted. "I wanted tonight to be special." Charlotte arrived soon after, hugging her sister and niece before handing Ryan a bottle of wine. The three of them settled down in the dining room, Grace sleeping peacefully on the monitor next to them. During dinner, Ryan seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. "Sorry," he said after another message. "It's about the hostile takeover." "Is everything all right?" Valerie asked, genuinely concerned. Actually, Ryan put the phone away, taking a deep breath. "That's why I wanted you here today. I've made an important decision." Charlotte and Valerie exchanged glances as Ryan stood up, walking over to a side table where there were some documents. "Over the past few months, I've realized that I've built something much bigger than a corporate empire," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I built a family, and I want to make sure that legacy continues." He handed Valerie the documents. They were stock transfer papers. He was dividing the ownership of Hamilton Industries, creating a trust fund not only for Grace, but also establishing Valerie as a major shareholder. "Ryan," Valerie began, but he interrupted her gently. "It's not about money or control," he explained. "It's about building something together, something Grace can be proud of one day. Not as an imposed inheritance, but as a legacy of transformation." Charlotte discreetly stood up, muttering something about checking up on Grace, leaving the two of them alone. "You don't have to do that," Valerie said softly. "I know, but I do. Not as CEO Ryan Hamilton, trying to control everything, but as Grace's father, the man you helped me become." At that moment, as if sensing the importance of the conversation, Grace began to cry softly. Valerie picked her up, and Ryan moved closer, wrapping them both in a gentle hug. "We're a family," he whispered. "Not in the traditional way, perhaps, but in the way that's right for us." Valerie looked at the documents on the table, then at her daughter, and finally at Ryan. "All right," she said, "but on one condition." "What?" "You have to read my book first." "All of it?" Ryan's smile lit up his tired face. "I've already started," he admitted. "I found the first few chapters on your laptop when you were in hospital with Grace." "You what? Old controlling cell mania?" he joked. "But I only read it because the title intrigued me." "And Valerie? She's incredible, just like you." The rest of the evening passed in a bubble of familiar intimacy, with Charlotte returning to find the three of them, Ryan, Valerie, and Grace, slow dancing to an old lullaby, creating yet another precious moment in their unconventional story of love and transformation. The office on the top floor of Hamilton Industries looked different that spring morning. Ryan watched the city through the panoramic windows, but his focus was on the photo on his cell phone. Grace, now 6 months old, smiling as Valerie held her on the Kerry Park swing. "Mr. Hamilton?" Marcus Chin entered with a stack of documents. "The hostile bid for Morgan Enterprises has gone up. They're offering 30% above market value." Ryan placed the phone on the table, a small smile playing on his lips. "You know, Marcus, a year ago I would have been obsessed with this acquisition. Now, I have more important things to consider." Taking a folder from his drawer, Ryan revealed his counter-proposal, a restructuring plan that would transform Hamilton Industries into a family business, with a strong focus on social responsibility and sustainable development. "But the shareholders," Marcus began. "We've already talked to the main ones," Ryan interrupted him, "including our newest shareholder, Valerie Cooper, in the apartment in Queen, and..." Valerie was finishing the last chapters of her book while Grace slept. Her computer screen showed the contract with Cascade Publishing. Her first novel would be published in the fall. The soft sound of the intercom announced the arrival of Charlotte, who had flown in from Portland for a special weekend. "Is the manuscript ready?" she asked, hugging her sister. "Almost," Valerie replied, picking up Grace, who had just woken up. "All that's missing is the epilogue." Ryan insists it has to be perfect. It still amazes me how you two found that balance, Charlotte commented, joking with her niece. The powerful CEO and the independent housekeeper. Life has an interesting sense of humor, Valerie smiled, remembering all the transformations of the last 15 months. Dinner that night would be at Ryan's house, now a weekly event that everyone looked forward to. The kitchen, once spotless and practically untouched, now showed signs of frequent use. Marked recipe books, organized spices, and a high chair for Grace next to the central island. Guess who learned how to make truffle risotto? Ryan announced proudly when they arrived. Impressive, Charlotte laughed. Who knew the Seattle Shark would become an amateur chef? People change, Ryan replied, taking Grace in his arms. Especially when they find the right reasons. Over dinner, they discussed the latest developments. The hostile takeover attempt, Valerie's book, Grace's first teeth. But there was something else in the air, an expectation that Ryan tried, without much success, to disguise. Okay, spit it out, Valerie finally said. You've been nervous ever since we arrived. Ryan cleared his throat, getting up to get something from his office. He returned with 3 envelopes. First, he began, handing an envelope to Charlotte. Your transfer to Cascade Publishing's Seattle office has been approved. If you still want to move, Charlotte squealed with joy, hugging him impulsively. She had been trying for months to get this transfer to be closer to her family. Secondly, he continued, handing Valerie another envelope. The first reviews of your book. Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, everyone loved it. Valerie opened the envelope with trembling hands, tears forming in her eyes as she read the laudatory words about her story. The story? And third, Ryan hesitated, holding up the last envelope. This one is different. It's not a contract or a business proposal. It's a promise. Inside the envelope was a key and a handwritten letter. To Valerie and Grace, I'm not asking you to live here. I'm not trying to control or rush anything. I'm just saying that this house, like my heart, will always have room for you. In your time, in your way. Love, Ryan. The silence that followed was filled only by the soft sound of Grace playing with her toys, oblivious to the significant moment that was unfolding. Ryan, Valerie began, but he gently interrupted her. You don't have to answer now, or ever, if you don't want to. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, that I'll always be here, not as the CEO of Hamilton Industries, but as Grace's father, as her partner in this incredible journey that began with some unexpected news in my office 15 months ago. Charlotte discreetly picked Grace up, muttering something about showing her niece the stars in the garden. When they were alone, Valerie looked at the key in her hands, then at Ryan. You know what's funny? She said softly. The epilogue I'm trying to write is about exactly that. About how sometimes love doesn't follow contracts or timetables. About how the best stories are the ones we write day after day, page after page, without knowing exactly where they're going. Ryan moved closer, taking her hands in his. And where do you think our story is going? I don't know, Valerie smiled, but for the first time in my life, not being in total control doesn't scare me anymore. From the garden came Charlotte's voice, singing to Grace, mixed with the baby's laughter. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, while inside the Victorian house and Queen, and two people whom fate had brought together in the most unexpected way were discovering that sometimes the best contracts are those written not on paper, but in the heart.